Welcome to And It's Live, the podcast which dives deep into football's most iconic seasons, stories, and what ifs. If you love football, history, tactics, and nostalgia, make sure to subscribe, hit the bell, and drop us a like on YouTube so you don't miss an episode. Hello and welcome to this week's episode of The Main Event, the Champions League history show here on Heart and Hand. I'm Martin Ramsey, your host as always, and we are in part 2 of 3, our look at 2000-2001. I'm joined as always by Mr. Adam Thornton. Good evening, Adam.
Good evening, Martin.
And good evening, David Edgar. How are we, David? I'm wondering about your well-being and general health.
Thank you. I'm delighted to hear that because, as you know, how your welfare is never far from my thoughts. Me being so selfless, but yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Can't believe it's been a week already.
Indeed, it's incredible how we do it. The two finalists we will obviously get to in due course. The other story of this season's Champions League was unquestionably Leeds United. We'll have our thoughts on that in a minute, but I thought it would be best to bring in someone who does know their stuff. The Daily Telegraph's Rob Bagchi is a Leeds United fan of great vintage. His brilliant book on the Don Revie years is worth the read, but he lived and breathed this particular run, and I sat down with him earlier to discuss it. I'm delighted to be joined by the Daily Telegraph's Rob Bagchi and Leeds United fan Rob Bagchi to talk about that particular campaign in the Champions League 2000-2001. Welcome to Heart and Hand, Rob. Hope you're well.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. It's great to be here.
Before we get into 2000-2001, how did this young, vibrant, exciting Leeds United side come to life? How did you, as an observer, as a fan, see that develop? And how important was the season before, where, of course, Champions League football was guaranteed, and a European run to the semi-finals of the UEFA Cup?
Yeah, it had been crucial, really, that when O'Leary took over after Graham's only full season in charge, he managed to blend, bring in some of the youth team winners that had won the FA Youth Cup in 1997. Kewell had played under Graham, but none of the others had, and he integrated Woodgate and McPhail, and then brought in Alan Smith quite spectacularly against Liverpool in 97-98. And we'd finished 5th in 98. Then in 98-99, we finished 4th. Largely on the back of David Batty coming back and Jimmy Floyd Hasselbank's goals. Then they used that summer when Hasselbank wanted a trebling of his wages to stay at Leeds. So they sold him to Atletico, and with that money, they bought in Michael Bridges and Danny Mills, Michael Dewberry, that calibre of players. So players that weren't established Premier League players, but they were in and out of their teams as they sort of established themselves. And that team was sensational. That was, I think, one of my favourite seasons, the run to third in 99-2000. Michael Bridges was a spectacular success. Harry Kewell won Young Player of the Year. Smith came in and made a terrible nuisance of himself, but also, grabbed a few goals, a few vital goals. And I think for nearly 2 seasons, Leeds not only never lost when Smith scored, it was the old rush thing. They actually won when Smith scored. And that team seemed to be developing really nicely. Of course, we had the tragedy we beat the year before in the UEFA Cup. We lost to Roma. And then the following year, 99-2000, we beat them and then went on to the semi-final where we had the tragedy in Istanbul where Chris Loftus and Kevin Spate were murdered. And then we had the home leg against Galatasaray, which was one of the nastiest atmospheres I've ever been at. There were no away fans there, but, the hostility towards their players and the anger that still endures 25 years on because there's been no real justice for those killings. So we were steadily building towards it, but the focus really was on what happened away from the matches in Europe that season. So I think we only qualified for the Champions League on the final day when our old player David Weatherall scored against Liverpool. I was at West Ham that day. We drew 0-0, and the celebration was just off the scale. I just couldn't really, it couldn't really compute that although we'd been league champions in 1992, we'd been so on the decline under the latter years of Wilkinson. And then we'd had a terrible, turgid first season under Graham. Then he, kicked on after coming in halfway through that season. Then O'Leary had established this vibrant young team. So I think we all felt that we stood a decent chance of doing well in the league in 2000, 2001, but I don't think any of us thought that we'd kick on in Europe.
Kick on, you did. How important was the vibrancy then, or the youthful element? My recollections of the O'Leary maybe over-egged that quite a lot. He used to talk about my babies in interviews, and it just felt a wee bit over the top. But clearly, this was such a young and hungry team. Players at that end of their career where they just wanted more and more and more, and it's such a huge ingredient, isn't it? As long as you have some kind of experience, talk about David Batty in there, to shape and mould and guide, I suppose. Yeah,
I mean, the youth really was the thing that sparked the crowd's affection. I mean, one of the curious anomalies about Leeds is that we've never been more successful in terms of having large crowds as we were consistently under O'Leary. We were sold out every week. And I think having that core of players you could identify with, who were clearly friends, for better or for worse, as I'm sure we'll touch on in terms of the assault allegation and the affray charges that really derailed the team in January 2000 and would haunt them for 2 years. Obviously, nothing as bad as what happened to Sarfraz Najib, but it was a hangover that hit them. But they were socialising together. They were hanging out together. There were upsides of that too, as I'm sure we'll touch on, the famous incident after we drew with Milan in San Siro, and Gary Kelly led the players out into the centre circle. Now he talks about that being something that he was singing Marching On Together in a centre circle as the fans, we were all penned into the away section and left for a good hour afterwards. But he talks about that's what they would do between themselves anyway during that European campaign. The night before matches, they would hang together. They would never be in their rooms. They would all be in the foyer in the hotel. They'd be ordering pizzas. They'd be talking together. So it really was a sense of unity amongst them.
And yeah, fans can really buy into that, can't they? They what you see as a supporter. When you're watching a team, and when you're just watching a collection of hired hands that are there to kind of do a job, and there's something maybe intangible, but it's something you can really, really buy into. You're a qualifier to deal with before getting into the Champions League proper, 1860 Munich. I won't remind you of the last time that you had a Champions League qualifier, of course, in 92, 93. That obviously didn't go too well for you, very well for us. But any nerves around that, or was that just seen as a fairly routine barrier? German side or not?
Yeah, I think O'Leary himself played down our chances, which is one. We talked about earlier about his attitude and the young babies and everything. I think he comes across still as a fairly divisive character amongst Leeds fans, and what he does is he tends to lay it on thick. I have spoken to him fairly recently, and you will ask him a question and he will say something along the lines of, "I'm sure I wouldn't have to tell such a great journalist as you, with the answer." And that there's that unctuous thing there, but I think it's in everything that he does. And yet, I've seen him being extremely genuine among fans on pre-season tours. He would send drinks over. When other club officials, when he was assistant manager to Graham, wanted to turf us out of the team hotel, if you were hanging around or anything, he'd be absolutely fine with it. And he would talk to you, and he would be extremely down to earth. And I know ultimately he rubbed the players up the wrong way, and that stuff about my babies, or when he would sort of talk about Alec Ferguson and whether he could potentially be a successor to him, he would always downplay it and portray himself as this terribly naive and young coach who was just right on the bottom rung of the ladder. But I think he had an inner sense of this team being decent. But what we did have for the 1860 Munich game was a lack of personnel. We had injuries that would keep Batty out until December, Kewell out until December. We had problems at centre half, and although they'd invested in the summer, they brought in I think Viduka and Decor and Matteo. Matteo was injured, so we didn't really know what to expect from the home game. But I mean, although we ended up having 2 players sent off in that home leg, both of them for second bookable offences, which compounded our troubles heading to Munich. It actually, the away leg, which we won 1-0, was actually pretty comfortable, even though, you had Gary Kelly playing in midfield, he had Ian Hart playing in midfield. It was not an ideal scenario. But somehow we prevailed.
But surely that experience of the season before, you take a lot from a run to the semi-finals of any European competition. It's dealing with challenges and variance and they're young, but they've got some experience in the bank already. You make it, and like any football fan, especially the first time you're in the Champions League, or first time for a while you're back in the Champions League, there is an excitement, there's a free on, isn't there? And that's some group, really, isn't it? With Barcelona and Milan, 2 huge names, and then you've got probably what you feared the most, which was another trip to Turkey and Besiktas. Your memories of that particular draw, and then weird how often in this particular iteration of the Champions League, teams that get utterly hammered in that first group game go on to have quite successful either runs or just successful group finishes, actually. But yeah, your memories of that group stage, and then the draw, and then the Nou Camp and that opening game.
Yeah, I mean, there was a sense that the last thing we wanted was Besiktas. Even more frightening than the prospect of just playing football at San Siro or at the Nou Camp was the idea of having to go back to Istanbul. And I didn't go away. I'm not sure if there were any away fans allowed there. There was certainly no Besiktas fans at Elland Road for the home game. I think we all felt that Barcelona, I don't think we knew quite what to expect, given that I think Van Gaal had left the previous season, though it still seemed to be largely his team, with Rivaldo given a bit more freedom than Van Gaal would let him. But you just looked at that roster of players and saw how wonderfully they played for Ajax or PSV, and now for Barcelona, and just thought, yeah, it's likely that this is really going to be a step up. And there was a sense going into it, very much like when Man United got hammered by the Romario and Stoichkov team, that was on the cards. But in fact, although they played very well against us at Nou Camp, we didn't really have a team that we could, Viduka had gone off to play for Australia in the Olympic Games, having only just signed, and made himself extremely unpopular for choosing to do so. Whether he could have, I'm not really sure whether FIFA regulation would have allowed him to turn it down, but he'd gone. So we were back to really the team that had ended the previous season, with the addition of Decor. Still no Batty. Radaby got injured in that game, and he was a towering centre half for us. One of the most underrated players I think I've ever seen. That he had 2 or 3 years where he was just majestic in terms of his ability to withstand a collision, but also his strength in the air, his ability to read a game, just the way he would just snuff out danger. So he was injured, and yeah, we got hammered. I think there was a sense that the last time that we'd been there was the game that set us up to play you in 92-93 when we had the replay. And
of course,
so,
yeah.
and Carl shook up the world, but that came at such short notice that there were only a few hundred Leeds fans there. My brother being one of them, I couldn't afford to go back in those days, so I didn't go and miss one of the highlights of his life. But yeah, I think people felt that the chapel in the tunnel was where Leeds players ought to go at the end of the game, because it looked like that was it. And all the press reaction was that we were just completely out of our depth, and this was going to turn into a humiliation for us. So, sorry.
But home form is so important in these things, and that's what's going to see you through. Milan are up next to Island Road, and it's a late one. But how important is that Bowyer goal? Because Besiktas come to Leeds next, and it's an absolute hammering. Now I do wonder if that's very much fueled by the kind of atmosphere of what's gone before. I don't believe that's a game in and of itself. But how crucial then for everything we're going to talk about is that Bowyer goal at home to
absolutely essential. I mean, Shevchenko had given us quite a lot of grief down the right hand side for the whole game. Though I think we held our own. Our league form had been appalling, but when I think there was a sense of optimism that actually we were holding our own against a team that had like Maldini players in it, and for the mistake from the keeper Dida to let the ball. I mean, it was an absolute torrent that day. It absolutely threw it down. And once again, we had makeshift centre halves. I think Danny Mills played as a centre half, and Dewberry too. Woodgate still injured, Radaby injured. Matteo, that was his debut for Leeds. He played on the left side of midfield and did really well. Gave us a bit more balance than we'd had previously. So there was a bit more coherence to it. But Lee Bowyer just had a sensational season. I mean, he really started to contribute with goals the previous season, and now he just became this force of nature on the right hand side. He was box to box but wide really, and he started chancing his arm. The goal that he scored against Barcelona at home, had an element of fluke about it too, and this one definitely that he just took a pot shot with a few minutes left, and it was easily savable. Whether it was the rain, whether it was the atmosphere or what, or whether it was just Dida's erratic form, but he essentially just patted it over the line. It was remarkable, and it just triggered an outpouring of it was relief more than anything, more than exultation. There was a sense that okay, we're not going to get absolutely panned every time we go out in this competition, because our league form suggested that we really were in trouble.
So often the case, though, that Europe is a welcome distraction from a difficult domestic season, and it's often hard to do both. Just a brief word on the kind of Turkish doubleheader in the middle, huge home win, and then just a sensible professional performance in Istanbul, given the circumstances.
Absolutely, I think they'd wanted to take the sting out of the occasion, and they played. They played maturely. Looking after the ball well, conceding very few chances. But of course, then we also had the issue that Bridges blew his Achilles tendon, and essentially was never the same player again. He hardly played in the top flight after that. So it was, 2 steps forward, 1 step back as ever that season. There always seemed to be some sort of injury around the corner. And one that I know Henry Winter once wrote, as he tends to do, rather overblowing it, but about Bridges being potentially a Bergkamp figure for England. But in the 18 months that we had him and had him fit, he really looked as though he was an international player in the making, that he had the vision and he had the skill with his feet to be able to to reach that level. You know, like Matt Jansen of Blackburn Rovers, I think, too, whose career was tragically cut short by accident in his case rather than injury. But we just couldn't seem to put the same team out every week. That was becoming a real issue. But I think their maturity in Istanbul, given that all of them had been, with the exception of the new signings, had been there the year before and had to play that first leg of that semi-final, knowing what had happened only a few hours earlier, I think showed fortitude as much as anything else.
How disappointing was that injury time Rivaldo equaliser at Ellen Road after Bowyer gets Leeds ahead early on over the piece of that 95 minutes as it ended up?
Yeah, I think. I mean, O'Leary claimed that the referee should have blown his whistle, but I don't think he was ever going to when the ball was still in play. And it did seem like a body blow. We had so much possession against a team that had just, absolutely pasted us a few weeks before, that it seemed that we were heading in the victory there would have put us through, and more crucially, knocked Barcelona out. So it really was a gut punch. But actually, in the run of things, it didn't really matter all that much, because they themselves had I think they'd lost in Besiktas, hadn't they? So it had more of an element of must win for them than it had for us. So although pretty daunting to have to go to San Siro.
Yeah, you have to go to Milan and find a point. They're already through though, but I don't know, is that the kind of thing football fans try to tell themselves, that they won't be trying as hard? And Dominic Matteo turns out to be the main man, puts Leeds ahead, and Serginho, I think it was, that grabbed the goal back. Barcelona raining goals as you would expect at home to Besiktas, but another one where you had to navigate a challenge, an obstacle, and despite that opening pummeling, you're through in second place in that second group phase. Were you in Milan that night?
Yeah, it was one of the great experiences, that just to be able to be there when I'd been there the previous season when my brother had a stag do, so I'd been to a Milan derby, but to be able to go there and see Leeds play there and Leeds prevail there was amazing. And there just seemed to be such a bond between the players and the fans at that time. You were always in fear, not so much for your life, but it was never very pleasant going to games in Italy as a overseas away fan. But that day didn't seem to have any real problems in the groups that I was hanging out with, and to see Matteo rise so well at the near post to flick that goal in, and we had to survive quite a lot of pressure towards the end. I know that the Barcelona president, I think, had said that that Milan wouldn't try, and Milan hadn't tried, but I really don't think you could discern that from the way that they played. They were still a wonderful side, so it was great. And then you had the scene on the pitch afterwards, where the players came back out and were swigging cans of Heineken as they took the mic and sang to us largely. I think Kelly says, I spoke to him a couple of years ago, that Peter Ridsdale tried to tell him to do that again whenever we won a match in Europe, that he would get, and he just said, well, it was spontaneous that night. Why would you carry on doing it? But he'd enjoyed it so much that Ridsdale, as is his want, they don't call him Publicity Pete for nothing. Yeah,
we'll come to Peter in a moment. So you're into this second group phase again. The draw. Well, how is it ever going to be easy? That's the notion of that second group phase. So difficult. It's Real Madrid this time instead of Barcelona. It's Lazio, a flying Lazio, champions of Italy, Lazio, instead of Milan, an Anderlecht side who had caused big problems for Manchester United, I think, in the previous group stage. They'd won that, and again, a defeat this time at home to Real Madrid. What are your expectations at this moment, Rob? About, have you met them? The fact that you've escaped this very difficult group, first time at this level, and anything from here on in is just a bonus, and you probably don't really expect to get through this second examination, or do you think there's a possibility?
No, I think when it first started, we knew it was both Real Madrid and Lazio, that lightning wouldn't strike twice. We wouldn't be able to somehow conjure a way of getting out of this group. The only, I suppose, thing in our favour was the position of Sven Eriksson at Lazio. I think he'd already agreed to become England manager, and there was talk of instability within their camp. But when Real Madrid came to Elland Road, it was the way they just pounced on any mistake. We had a couple of chances, but to see the calibre of the players that they had, Hierro was back in the side. I think he'd been injured the previous year, and he just seemed like a colossus. McManaman and Figo. It was sensational to watch, really. I mean, you had your heart in your mouth every time they went forward. And although it took them an hour, I think, to score, and then they quickly scored a second, but it just seemed that this was a real step up in class, even from the first group stage.
Alan Smith is the real breakout for me, I think, in this, as someone who was simply watching on television and watching from afar. He scores in Rome, I'm sure, against Lazio, a win that I'm not entirely sure you would have expected going into that particular evening. Brilliant from memory in Belgium, because you basically win 3 games in a row, don't you, over the winter, because the group's 2 stage plays 2 games before Christmas, and then I think reconvenes just after. And he looked to have maybe not the world at his feet, but certainly a sparkling career ahead of him. That's the plus side. That's the bright side of this this moment, Rob. You've alluded to the darker side earlier on. What impact did that evening have on how this season and beyond was going to transpire?
Well, the court case began in February, just before the matches started again. So the double header against Anderlecht, in particular. So at that point, it didn't seem to affect Bowyer all that much. I mean, he took a helicopter straight from court to go to Everton. In fact, if anything, it seemed to give him a sense of release away from being on trial. He played brilliantly against Anderlecht and in both legs. I think he was driven back from Hull, where the trial took place, on the night of the Anderlecht game, and got to the stadium within an hour and 15 minutes of kickoff, and was straight in the team. And although we didn't play all that well in the home leg, he was there. But the trial had the opposite effect on Woodgate. It completely destroyed him emotionally, and you barely saw him from the moment it started for the next 6 months. And he'd been such a he is a gregarious person. He is extremely funny and always, not so much daft as I think knowingly self-deprecating in the way that he portrays himself. But of course, when the saga of the collapsed trial hit, it kept him in limbo for another few months. But of course, that's nothing compared with what the family of Najib, Sarfraz Najib, went through. But it was hanging over us all the time, and hanging over the club. So it essentially, because the trial was ruined by the Sunday Mirror publishing an interview with the father of Sarfraz Najib, saying that there was an element of racial hatred in the crime, while the jury was still out deliberating on their verdict. They published a week too early, and the mistrial was declared. again, with the caveat that it's nothing compared with what happened to Sarfraz Najib, but it essentially hung over the club for 3 seasons. It happened in January 2000. We're talking about 2000, 2001, and there was no resolution until the end of 2001. So it bled into the following season too. But yeah, Bowyer, I don't know. I don't know how you have that sense of resolve just to be able to turn up. And I don't think anyone's really ever explored the issue with him. He's not really very talkative on the subject. I can understand, because he did settle. He was found not guilty, but he did make a civil court settlement. Woodgate was found guilty of a fray, but 2 of his friends, particularly one of them, was jailed for 6 years for the assault.
And on the lighter side, some love for Alan Smith, or is the love for Alan Smith given for whom he would sign later?
Yeah.
When Leeds fans look back at this time, and he, as I said, to me on the outside, I know Boyer's had a great season, but he represents this energy for me, and the skill and intelligence, and it looked like he was going to have a career. I can tell you how often he was linked with Rangers at this time, weirdly, but that's just kind of fan forum fantasy, I think.
Well, I think he was a professor. He claimed to be a Rangers fan. There are pictures of him in a Rangers shirt as a boy.
But as do you look, or do Leeds fans look back, when they do look back at this time, is he lionised as probably as much as he should be because he went to Manchester United? No,
the majority of Leeds fans consider him a pariah, and that, I know he's in America now, and he speaks to Man United media, but he's never done anything with Leeds since going. And I have some sympathy for him in that the only deal on the table for him that guaranteed that Leeds would get the money up front was from Man United, and no one else was willing to pay what they were willing to pay. But of course, he made himself a hostage to fortune by saying that he would never go there 9 months previously, playing to the gallery, whereas he's not really a football fan. He's not really a Leeds fan. He liked playing football, but to have that tribal thing that we have, he didn't have it. And I don't think he thought the backlash would be as strong as it was. But he can't really show his face in Ellen Road again. That when we had our centenary 4 years ago, Joe Jordan and Gordon McQueen came back, and they've had 40 years of dogs abuse every time they turned up at Ellen Road, and Cantona has the same. But I don't think, if you're being rational, that you have anything other than a fondness for the 19, 20, 21-year-old Alan Smith. That his petulance, his ability to be a dickhead with referees, was part of his appeal really at the time. But I think that tended, when the red cards started accumulating, that tended to overshadow the good that he brought. That sort of, he had what Ron Atkinson used to call an arrive. The way that he would time his runs into the box was perfect. He was never made to be a midfielder. He was a support striker. He was that position. So when clubs, had too many forwards and tried to put him into central midfield or play him out wide, as Venables did in a 4-3-3, it never worked. That wasn't his forte. His forte was working off Hasselbank or Viduka and making those runs.
You get out that group though, really on the back of those 3 wins on the spin. You can manage the other 2 games, and you're in the quarterfinals, of course, and it's going to be a Spanish double in terms of the quarters and semis. Deportivo La Coruña. We don't know at this stage just how handy Deportivo can be at coming back from horrendously bad first legs. You must have felt very confident after beating them 3-0 at Ellen Road. Got a bit shaky though in Spain.
It was absolutely unbelievable, that game. I didn't go to it, but friends did. But I mean, the home game had been foreshadowed by Irueta saying that they welcomed drawing us, and of all the teams that they could have drawn, we were obviously the weaker of the potential opponents, which you you hear all this crap all the time of people pinning things up on the dressing room wall. Do you think it actually happens, or it really is just a symbol of telling them that this had happened? But yeah, we got absolutely hammered there. I think they hit the post 3 times. They had a penalty. Quality of their players, Pandiani and Tristan and Roy Mackay and the Jalminia. I mean, they were a sensational team, and I don't really know how. Obviously, we scored 2 goals from corners at Ellen Road, and Ian Hart, who is remembered more for he's remembered for 2 things: one, for his free kicks, but also for the fact that he had no pace and he was skinned quite a lot in the last couple of years at Leeds. He always had defensive frailties. And I'm not likening to Roberto Carlos, but so did he. It's odd that you have such a problem player in a vital defensive position in terms of his defending capability, and yet what he brought to the team was remarkable. His crossing, he scored the first goal with a free kick, and then the 2 3-0 up were set up by him. But there were times when the right winger would just absolutely shred him. And when Kuehl came back in the side around December, I mean, he was a hell of a talent for 2 or 3 seasons, Harry Kuehl, and he didn't go on because of injuries and I think bad judgment to have the career that he should have had.
Mm-hmm.
But he increasingly, the older he got, and we're only talking early 20s, would not do his defensive work as well. And for a player as vulnerable as Hart, that left him pretty much exposed, as it did that night in La Coruña.
We know what it's like to get on a run in these things as fans. You've literally been on one the season before getting to the semi-finals, and there's a switch that's flicked between this has been fun to oh shit, we could win this. Did you get to that sense going into that Valencia semi-final that we're two matches away from a final, and then you never know when you start to dream, because they'd been in the final before, of course. They're a force now in European football, which they would demonstrate pretty convincingly over the 2 legs. Or did you have concerns that you've kind of bumped and moved around this season with so much turbulence, injuries and off-field kind of situations, that it was going to catch up? Well,
I think because our league form had suddenly turned its corner in early January, and I think we were 13th on January the 1st, and we ended up winning 12 of the next 16 games, only lost 1, I think, that we were motoring up the league. We were playing well, but we knew that we had to win the home leg. I certainly believe that we could get through to the final, but we'd have to win the home leg because we'd been battered in Camp Nou. The away game against Real Madrid was a strange one because we played really well and Raul punched one in to win 3-2, but we'd got absolutely hammered in La Coruña. So we'd know that our trips to Spain had been nothing but painful for us. So I think we knew that we had to do something in their first leg, and we just couldn't break them down. We fashioned a couple of sort of half chances, but nothing really. I think once it was shown on TV that Bowyer had stamped on, was it Sanchez or Vicente? I can't remember, but he and then they left it until the night before to announce that he was suspended. And he had been the vital player for us. As much as Smith's goals had been brilliant, he had been the driving force in that campaign. I think we all thought that at Mestalla that it was going to be really difficult because we had no one to replace him, really.
In the summer of just the autumn of 2001, when you move on into a new season, that's when Seth Johnson comes in and things really start to move. Now, we're both very well aware of what chasing the dream looks like and the legacy that can leave. As a fan, and everything that you've gone through over the last 20 years or so, are you still able to look back with fondness at this time in and of itself and that team and what joy and excitement and promise and hope that they brought you as a supporter, or is it always kind of tempered with, but you know, the price we paid for that? Or were you paying the price for that, or was it the price you were actually paying for the summer of 2001 onwards, when Ridsdale in particular felt, well, all we need to do is keep doing this and buy him, and we'll be absolutely fine. Where actually, by this summer, you kind of done things in a normal way. I mean, where does that line lie, where you have no corporate governance and no responsibility?
Well, it was a reckless punt. You know, the idea of having a chairman who was also the chief executive, the fact that none of the individuals on the board had actually put any of their own or any significant sums of their own money into the club, was always a warning sign that something was wrong. In that you could chase the Champions League as being the panacea financially for your club. It would allow you to leapfrog into the top three consistently. But the previous summer, what they had done was essentially get into bed with a company run by the agent Ray Ranson, which they used to finance the deals for Viduka, Decor and Matteo, essentially on hire purchase. And they went the same again for Ferdinand, paying 18 million for him in December of 2000. So I think, I mean, as has happened this year in losing in the Championship playoff final, I think what you mourn is the loss of potential of what that team could have been, rather than you know, tie it all together and think that was the reason the club fell apart. You know, there's a sort of an element of a lost future about that 2001 team. But yeah, the wheels financially should have, because we didn't qualify for the Champions League that year, they took another massive punt, and they went for Seth Johnson and they went for Robbie Fowler, and the idea of having Fowler was, I think, something that O'Leary just couldn't resist once he heard he came on the market. But that was Ridsdale's job, to resist him, to say, you've got Viduka, you've got Smith, you've got Robbie Keane, you've got, you know, for God's sake, how many do you want? But they always felt that they could actually sell these assets for more than they paid for them, which is obviously the whole financial model. And there was a collapse in the transfer market after, you know, the collapse of On Digital, and there was a fear that rights would diminish. And then, you know, we had the problems with the court case coming, and then O'Leary's book, and that. So I think if there was a cut-off point at 2001, in the summer of 2001, I think I can look back extremely fondly on that campaign. Think we got about as far as we possibly could do. I know that, you know, some point to the handball goal for the first Valencia goal, but we were never really at the races. Mendieta absolutely slaughtered us down that side, and you know, to see Nigel Martin beaten low at his bottom left corner a couple of times from distance, you know, he was the best keeper we've ever had. So you know, I can't hold him responsible for anything like that. It was just felt like a tidal wave of their attacks, really. And then of course Smith, as was become more prominent, gets himself sent off in that game, and then these sort of themes that would pollute our memories of what happened over the next couple of years. But Smith would get increasingly out of control in terms of his discipline. The financial repercussions of what they'd done came back to bite them, and you know, you would end up, even towards the end of the 2001-2002 season, when it seemed pretty obvious that they would have to sell Ferdinand, even though they would deny it. It suddenly started to creep in that wasn't going to be enough, that they had dug themselves such a hole that they couldn't get out of it. And you know, that there is something absolutely ridiculous in a failure of corporate governance that went on there, that they seem to have this idea of living a dream, and then, you know, the easy cliche of saying it turned into a nightmare. Well, it did. You know, they put that because there was no financial stability behind the club other than loans. And as we know, loans have obligations. And when they bite, they almost brought the club, well, they put it on its knees for almost 18 years. And, you know, we're still paying the price for that now. We missed out on the Premier League's imperial phase in terms of pulling in money. And that's why we go up, we can't sustain it, we come down. That's what we are. We're not where we should be in terms of our perceived sense of how big we are, or in terms of, you know, commercially how big we are.
Rob, I could talk to you about this for another 2 hours because there's probably a lot of shared and overlapping themes between our two clubs. But thank you so much for joining us to recount your experience of what was unquestionably a memorable season.
Thank you, Martin. It's been a pleasure.
Dave, I'll start with you, just from a Seagull's perspective, and I'll get Adam in soon to discuss just how that team was made up. This is your typical roller coaster of a campaign. There's luck involved, the Dida mishandling of the Lee Bowyer shot, even Lee Bowyer's shot against, or shot come cross, whatever it was, against Barcelona in that match. There's genuine quality. We're going to talk about the second phase in a moment, and it's just that kind of nice recipe of ingredients, I suppose. Bit of youth, bit of experience, and good matches, and yeah, just things kind of just taking off. But a definite feeling that this is it, really, for them. It's now or never.
Yeah, I mean, Leeds United in this era where they had a soap opera quality, didn't they? Headlines, both sides of the newspaper, and there was a vibrancy about the side, as you mentioned. A lot of youngsters in the team. David O'Leary couldn't seem to go an interview without calling them "my babies" every sodding week on Match of the Day. But they were exciting. They played some good stuff. And Leeds, you know, it's maybe difficult for younger listeners, Martin, when Leeds have spent so much of this century, really, either in the lower leagues or a yo-yo club to the top division because of this. But at this point, you know, they were the league champions 92-93. They'd been in the Premier League. They'd gone through, you know, we've seen the McAllister Strachan iteration, then the City Yeboah one, and now they're onto this thing. And they were seized with this ambition, and they were very, you know, this is the time off the field of, you know, in the late 90s, there's the bull stock market, there's internet stocks, you know, there's the Millennium Dome, New Labour, Cool Britannia. And Leeds are, I think, the perfect example of a bubble that grows and grows and grows, and it's really exciting and huge, and you wonder where it's going to stop. And then when it does stop, Jesus, it's destructive, and it takes out a lot of stuff with it. And that is, of course, the Leeds United story of this particular era. But as a football side, you know, putting aside some of the personalities of the people involved, there was a sort of vibrancy about them that also could manifest itself in, you couldn't see this Leeds team winning a title, or certainly I couldn't back then, because you just felt at some point there would be, in the way that some sides are clinical and cold, and or like the Manchester United of this era, a side who can, if you like, harness emotion. I felt that Leeds were always, things happened to Leeds rather than because of them at times. They almost seemed like, you know, a protagonist, kind of like the Truman Show, you know, with Leeds, that there was these things that were happening about and around them that they had no control over, but it made for some really exciting football. There's no getting away from it.
I'll pick you up on one thing just to illustrate a point there, David, because you a very rare error. David Leary wouldn't have been on Match of the Day because Match of the Day wasn't happening at that point because of the Premiership and because of ITV and on digital and the huge investment in the lower leagues, and what could
I forget the tactics
go wrong about that. And that's
how could I forget Andy and his truck, you know, one of the seminal his tactics truck, you know, Barry Venison.
But that's what Leeds
but it was he
mortgaged. They gambled so much on the success and the money that on digital was going to provide the Champions League exclusively on this digital service. Des Lynam and Ali McCoist in a studio box at Highbury, for example, taking in one of the Arsenal games. I remember, and that's exactly why Leeds found themselves in a bit of bother. Adam, the team itself, again, a lot of young players. Rob was very good at just kind of reminding me how often they had injuries and they had to compensate for those injuries, and players had to come in and kind of do a shift. It was never this kind of settled thing. I guess a couple of things that come through. Lee Bowyer's a very difficult character to like. And the thing hanging over this whole campaign really is the court case and the potential action on him and Woodgate, and then the course obviously dissolving into farce because the newspaper went early and it was a mistrial. But Lee Bowyer was superb in this season. He was an absolute driving force, and this might be sacrilege on the site, but Mark Viduka was superb, and I guess brilliant foil as a powerful number 9 for a quick, intelligent, fearless striker like Alan Smith to play off. And we go into the second group phase where Leeds are paired with Anderlecht, of whom we spoke quite a lot about last week, of course. Lazio and Real Madrid. We'll get into it in a moment, but the Leeds go to Belgium, as David says, a bear pit and a really difficult place to go. They win 4-1, and Smith is brilliant. He scores a winner in Rome. You forget just how good he was, and just combinations around the place. Harry Kewell as well, good fullbacks. I mean, what did you make of that team as a shape?
Yeah, loads of fun. I think it's. I think David said breath of fresh air. I think is fair. It just felt new. It felt like a team just appearing from nowhere. Certainly on the European stage. Again, in the last episode we spoke about tracking Sebastiano Rossi over 8 years. It's tough to believe it's the same club that we spoke about in the very first show, when you've got Cantona and all those guys, Gary McAllister, Gordon Strachan, etc. Just 7 or 8 years ago from now. It felt like, as with everything at this time, everything changed in such a short period of time in football, and I think this probably sums it up. They just appear again and they're brand new and fresh and exciting. I don't know if it's because they came out of pretty ropey 5 or 6 years. They had a George Graham 2 years. I think anybody coming out of that would probably be smiling. But the fact that David O'Leary got them playing such attacking football so quickly, loads of fun, high tempo, high energy, loads of flair. Hasselbank obviously isn't there this year, but it was the year before. Lots of fun, just my type of striker. Nice mix, as you mentioned there, foreign players in terms of European, and then you've obviously got a mix of domestic and Irish players who do quite well. Fullbacks, I like Dean Hart. I thought he was good. I enjoy a fullback that can hit a free kick. Really good. Kewell was exciting. Unfortunately, as we speak through it, there's more than a few Celtic links. And here Robbie Keane comes back from that Inter Milan loan. Again, another bizarre thing that you wouldn't have thought of happening at that stage, but he comes back in as well. So yeah, I think they're a really interesting team. At this stage, there's a lot going on. They have, I think, at this point started to chase a little bit, or maybe. So I don't want to say complacency, but I think we spoke about it. We spoke about it in last week's show about you find something that works, and then do you double down on that and start mining it for all it's worth? Or do you try and do something different to potentially take you to the next level, to make you unpredictable? I'm not sure. The transfer policy in a couple of years before this, pretty sensible to begin with. All makes sense. They're all sort of fitting into a team. But then there's this point, how do we evolve? How do we get better than this? How do we get more players in? Start splashing the cash, chasing quick wins to keep up with the sort of relative success that they've had, and it never really works. Obviously, we know there are financial problems that will come up, and mortgaging their income against Champions League gate receipts, very, I guess, similar to Rangers 10 or 12 years later in that Ali McCoist season, where if we hadn't went out of Europe in that year, who knows what might have happened. But also Leeds, I think, in this season in particular, wasn't it? They finished just behind the Champions League space, one point off, I think, in the Champions League spots, and they just end up spiraling. So it's not without a tint of I guess that in it, and it's tough to just focus on the football side of it when you know what's coming with them. But if we do, then it's a really, really exciting young team that was great to watch.
But that's what I mean about the sense that Leeds sort of gave off, that everything seemed to be just hell for leather, and there were court cases, there were players being signed, there was an injury crisis, the team changed week to week, they're going into these European games and playing some crazy harem scarum seat of your pants stuff. It was a club that just felt like it was constantly running at 100 miles an hour, and everything felt big and extended and glossy, but you had the feeling that they were kind of like an acid trip, and there's going to be a crash the next day, there's going to be a come down from it. And it was just how long they could keep, juggling everything that was going on. As an outsider, it was exciting and it was fascinating, but there was always the sense that this is going to end in tears. Yeah,
and just to I guess to finalise your point on Lee Bowyer, Martin, I completely agree. I think he summed up all of it at this stage. He summed up the sort of craziness of it, but also the quality of a player. I mean, again, if you're to say to people who finished second top goal scorer in the Champions League in 2001, there's 4 or 5 of them, and you start with Rivaldo, Giovanni Elber, Jardel, fair enough. You've then got Paul Scholes, Lee Bowyer, and Ivan Helguera on 6 goals as well in this league. It's a very strange mix sitting there behind Raul.
It should be mentioned as well that Alan Smith at this point hadn't began his summer holidays in home base in Darnley, which he would then go on for the next, has he stopped going yet? Are we stopped being linked with him every single summer?
For a few bits and pieces. Getting into that with Rob, I'd forgotten, to be honest, just how hated he is, and going from that figure of hope and local lad and all that, signing for Manchester United, like others have done, as Rob mentions, Joe Jordan, Gordon McQueen,
Cantona.
But he just to this day is absolute persona non grata. Anyway, Real Madrid cruise that group, Adam, but Leeds get out in second quite comfortably, actually. Anderlecht, their race is run, and at the bottom's Lazio. I was going to see what's going on. Sven leaves. He was supposed to leave at the end of the season. That was the deal, but then England were like, "Nah, we kind of need you." ASAP. He leaves in the January of 2001, I think. Dino Zoff comes in, and I mean, is it too simple to draw that particular line? They don't start this well, but I guess when you know your manager's off ski, and that would have been about the October that Keegan goes, and the FA say, "No, this guy's pretty much coming in." Is it as simple as that?
I think so, yeah. That sort of flux in there. I think, as we said before, we're now bouncing about in Serie A, and it's you win a title, then I'll win a title, and then someone else will win a title. So I think it's going to be quite tense anyway. So when you've got that bit of flux there, even Crespo coming in, who again we're really starting to see the money being spent here, but Crespo coming in this year from Parma scored a barrel load of goals for them. But yeah, they finish third. Who's to say? I know you're a big fan of Roma at this point, Martin. If Eriksson had been there, then they might have got the extra 6 points or so that they needed to win that league. Still an absolute embarrassment of Richie's. Claudio Lopez here this season. Karol Poborski still on his tour. He pitches up here. Dino Baggio comes in for a little bit as well.
Do you think that? Because when I look at the squad, not just this season, but the previous 2, I would say, and the stated ambition, biggest club in the world, and all that, too many players, too many signings, because the squad is massive.
Yeah,
Kragnotti's an underrated
nutter
maniac as well, isn't he?
Yeah.
There's so many of them that you do kind of forget. But yeah, he absolutely is crazy. So I think it's just one of those things. He just stockpiled as many as you like. But yeah, I think when we reeled them off, was it a couple of episodes ago? And the sheer scale of players that they've got, they still had Mancini and things kicking about. I mean, the front five in 2001, or the five attackers in 2001. Are Claudio Lopez, Marcelo Salas, Hernan Crespo, Simone Inzaghi, and Ravanelli. I mean that is excess, if nothing else is.
I go back to Martin. If too much of anything. Martin, there's maybe an interesting book for a gentleman who likes to look at wider socio-economic factors in football. But I do think that the way that the world economy had been throughout the 90s, where it was just bigger all the time.
Never going to end.
Yeah, that never exactly. We're boom and bust. It will not happen anymore. And these guys come from business. They go into football, but they're still obviously shaped by what they've grown up doing. And the amount of football clubs that we're discussing right now in this Champions League group who burst quite spectacularly in the next sort of 2-3 year period, Lazio being one of them. Now, it is staggering to look back, but it wasn't just football. It wasn't that these chairmen all got crazy at the same time for no reason. It was this sense of invulnerability, that spending money, taking on huge debt, leveraging yourself up to the nines. Adam mentioned earlier Leeds United with the ticket things, but then you get yourself into a position where, as Rangers did, the debt that we accrued was bigger than all the money we would have got for winning the Champions League. At that point, but debt could be taken on. Banks were willing to give it right up until they weren't, and they wanted their money back, and then the balloon has popped.
Football at this time is just 7 fat calves, isn't it? Really, I mean, it's absolutely that.
A little bit of sadness here just before we move on. This is the last season that Football Italia is on Channel 4. I thought it lasted a little bit longer, to be honest, but yeah, last one.
Still probably one of the worst mistakes in human history, if we're being honest.
Absolutely, yeah.
Elsewhere, in this second group phase that I'm coming to love quite a bit. Adam, Group B, Deportivo, Galatasaray, Milan and PSG. Loads of goals, lots of fun. One game in particular in La Coruña, with PSG go there. PSG needing to win. If they do win, it really puts Deportivo up against it. They have to go to the San Siro in the final game, and Paris Saint-Germain at home to Galatasaray. They're 3 up, PSG, in 55 minutes. They take off Arteta, actually, straight after that third goal. And Deportivo just throw caution to the wind. Tristan comes on, Pandiani comes on, and they win 4-3. This is not the last time we will see this kind of Deportivo approach. But what struck me, just purely from an aesthetic point of view, they bloody love a cross, and about 3 players in the box, all of whom able to thunder it in. There's probably 146 shots in goal in this game in general, but this side are chaotic, absolutely chaotic.
Yeah, there's no intricacy here. Tiki Taka has not reached northern Spain at this point at all. It is hell for leather. I think, to be honest, they're a bit of an outlier. It's a kind of British style. I would say here it's and I don't mean British of this time. Even I mean British of maybe 10 years before. It is hell for leather, 4-4-2.
Raw physicality, huge guys. Yeah,
it's really interesting. Like you said, like I mean, that PSG team is probably the I don't know how to say that word. What is that word? Antithesis. Antithesis of it. When you've got guys like JJ Okocha,
which coincidentally you sounded quite Spanish there.
I wanting to kind of play between the lines and things, and then Deportivo just turn up the okay, fair enough. How about Pandiani hat trick? How do you like that? So yeah, I think it is a nice little throwback, if you like, even if it is a Spanish team. But yeah, it just sort of summed it up. I think they were brutally efficient in these 2 years, really. But yeah, what a great comeback! Like you mentioned, it's all in the balance there. And if that had went the other way, then they wouldn't have got through. So yeah, I think it's one of those ones that I think, like you said, the second group stage. In my head again, I thought, right, well, okay, even last season's one, I thought, right, well, we'll see how it goes, but just goals everywhere, like just
so much fun.
goals everywhere, loads of fun. Deportivo playing away in PSG and buying in 3 goals as well after again PSG taking the lead. There's just lots and lots going on.
And it's Milan and PSG that miss out because it's Galatasaray and Depor that go through. A wee bit more straightforward in some of the other groups. Davey, Bayern are in with Spartak and Lyon and Arsenal. They're just kind of imperious, really starting to look good. Arsenal lose heavily in Moscow, and that again in an opening game, a heavy defeat, and they still
after taking the lead early.
After taking the lead, an early lead through Savinho. Watched the game at Highbury between Arsenal and Bayern. And Arsenal 2 up again, 55 minutes gone, places bouncing, Henry starting to really perfect that celebration where the arms are out and in a kind of pump action, and then Michael Tarnat scores. And you know things are bad when that happens. And Mehmet Shaw, who I don't know how many free kicks he's scored in this bloody tournament, Adam, but he's getting them. I thought there was a deflection first, and then I saw the replay, and it's just perfectly arced. And Alex Maniger, David, not David Seaman or Jens Lehmann. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, Alex Maniger was. There was once upon a time, younger listeners, where your reserve goalie was just a bloke, Andy Fuff, but you didn't have a second choice keeper. Yeah, it was, it's true. And these guys would stay there for years and years and just like kind of mascots, really. Nice lads. Alex Maniger was one of them, a goalkeeper with no working arms. Arsenal, again, just peculiar. And you're right, Martin, 4 goals. I mean, when does that happen to an Arsenal side, especially one that takes the lead? Bayern imperious is the perfect word. I won't even try and build on that because it's so perfect. Jens Jeremy's in this group stage is superb. Yeah. I actually all season Jens Jeremy's in this tournament is superb, but I forgot he was absolutely running the show. And then they do have these players like Giovanni Elber, who were very, very good. You do have Mehmet Shaw, etc. They had so many different options, but I think that they were a really good mix this season of tactical knowledge with some flexibility and different types of threats, different types of players. There is a big difference between Elber and Janker and various others, and they can come at you from 4 or 5 different ways. But there's a level of composure about this side that I think is staggering when you think what happened to them in '99. I really do.
Arsenal could have easily gone out if Lyon had won in Moscow in the last game, but they didn't. Arsenal went through on that head-to-head that you mentioned earlier, David, but Bayern are looking very good, as are Valencia there in the other group. A very straightforward group, really, them and Manchester United, locked on 12 points. Sturm Graz and Panathinaikos, very much the also-rans. Again, a situation that United, David, should have seen out, should have probably won the group. They go to Greece in the second last group stage game and are lucky to even get a point. Need a 92-minute Paul Scholes equaliser. But this is maybe symptomatic. They go through, but they go through in second place. And that's key because you're not seeded, therefore, in the quarterfinal draw. You're going to take one of the group winners. They are cruising the league at this minute, David. It's a scoosh, it's a procession. We mentioned last week how Arsenal just aren't quite there. They've got some ingredients, but not quite fully a championship contender side at this moment in time. United hammer them at Old Trafford 6-1 at the end of February. It's not long after this that they go to Greece for that Panathinaikos game. And there's just this sense of slippers on and lack of hunger. They've had the Holy Grail and they've never really quite got it back.
I think there's a sense going through Manchester United's campaign in this era, this post-Barcelona era, particularly in the group stages, Martin. And if you read some of Ferguson's interviews after matches back then, it's very much a sort of, right, we need to get by with this bit, and then it starts. Right, once we get to the real stuff, because they're bored with this now. This is all the shite that they have to go through to get to the latter stages where it matters. Because United now are in a rush to go and win this trophy. So there is a sense, I think, throughout their campaigns, because there will, if you look at United's results post Barcelona for the kind of 2-3 years after it, there are some really stupid defeats in there. And it's times where they've just, we're going to get through anyway. But of course, it can come back on you. It does come back on you in the draw. But they were just the sense of a side in a hurry to get to where they felt they were going. And I don't think they paid quite enough attention all the way through the group stages. And when you have 2 group stages rather than 1, of course, we all know these days in 2024 that the group stage is basically an annoyance for the big sides. We understand that. But United, I thought, were very in a hurry to sort of get back. And this impatience, I think, kind of came through at times in the football and will very much come through in their quarter-final.
I totally agree. You look at the surface of this group and you think 12 points, 3 goals conceded. What an absolute scoosh. But then you watch the games and you dig into the detail. First game, they had to come back. Two late Paul Scholes goals, get them the win. Away in Sturm Graz, Giggs in the last minute puts the game beyond doubt. The draw with Valencia, which is fair enough. In the Old Trafford game, it's a late equaliser, a late on goal, Wes Brown, and they get a draw there. 92nd minute to get a draw in Greece against Panathinaikos, and there's only really one or two games where you think they're comfortable with it. So I think you're right. You can't just switch it on. If I wasn't aware of how far ahead they were in the league until you'd mentioned it there, but that's just one of those things that you can't. It's impossible to turn it on if you're cruising in a competition and you've got that attitude. And you've already got to the highest peak, if you like, a year or two before that. It can be quite difficult to just turn it on when you need to. And I think we see that when they move through.
Yeah, which is why 99, because they're in something every week, league-wise, FA Cup, and of course this Champions League, where the draw, that intensity just never dips. But it has to dip sometime because they're human beings, and you cannot do that every season, and they are basically kicking back. They could have drawn Deportivo, they could have drawn Real Madrid, but they drew Bayern Munich. Narrative klaxon for the quarter-final. We will be back next week to discuss those quarter-final, semis, and the final in the San Siro. Thank you, David.
Very much looking forward to discussing these games.
Thank you, Adamski.
Thank you.
And thank you again to Rob Bagchi. Hope you enjoyed his contribution. We'll be back next week. Until then, bye for now. If you enjoyed the show and want to help us grow, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. On YouTube, search for And It's Live Podcast. We've got new deep dives, drafts, and breakdowns dropping every other day.